Isabella Hart adjusted her apron, trying to shake off the exhaustion from her long shift. The hours seemed to drag on as she worked in the high-end restaurant, but it paid the bills, just enough for her to live in a small apartment and scrape by. Her focus was momentarily interrupted when her manager, Greg, approached her, looking slightly more nervous than usual. "I need you to serve table 6, he said, his voice strained. "That's Versetti's table. He requested you." Isabella froze, feeling her stomach flip. Versetti. The name alone made her heart race. Dominic Versetti was a powerful man, a billionaire with ties to the mafia, feared by nearly everyone. She had heard the rumors. His reputation was one of ruthlessness and cold ambition. He didn't fit the type of people she usually interacted with at the restaurant. "Me?" she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. Greg gave her a sharp look. "Don't question it. Just go." Her mind was spinning, but she couldn't argue. She had a job to do, and no matter how intimidating this man was, she couldn't back down now. Taking a deep breath, she gathered herself and walked toward the table. She felt his gaze before she even reached them, piercing through her. When she met his eyes, there was a brief, strange connection, a flicker that made her pulse quicken. Dominic Versetti sat at the head of the table, surrounded by a few men in sharp suits, but his attention was solely on her. There was an unsettling calmness about him, a quiet power that made her feel like she was standing in the presence of a storm that could break at any moment. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "What can I get you?" Dominic's gaze never left her as he spoke. "I'll have the steak, rare. And a glass of red wine. Something bold." She nodded quickly, jotting down his order, then turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait." Her breath caught. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his once more. "I don't remember seeing you here before," he said, his tone smooth, almost curious. "What's your name?" "Isabella," she replied, her throat tight. "Isabella Hart." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a nod, he said, "I'll be expecting that steak. Rare." Isabella nodded, her mind racing as she quickly left the table, not daring to look back. The encounter felt too surreal, too overwhelming. Why had he singled her out? She was just a waitress. It didn't make sense. Later that evening, as she tried to shake off the discomfort, she found herself lost in her thoughts. Her shift had finally ended, and she was about to leave when the door to the restaurant opened again. She glanced up, thinking it was another late diner, but her breath caught in her throat when she saw him. Dominic Versetti. He was alone now, no entourage of men surrounding him. He walked directly toward her, his presence undeniable. "Isabella," he said, his voice softer now, the commanding tone replaced with something more personal. "I need to speak with you." For a moment, she was paralyzed. She had no idea what he could possibly want, but something about the way he approached her made her heart race. She opened her mouth to speak but found no words. Instead, she just nodded, too shocked to say anything else. Dominic paused in front of her, his eyes searching hers for a moment before he spoke again. "I wasn't expecting to find you here. But I'm glad I did." Isabella's pulse quickened as she stood frozen in place. She couldn't read him. Was he being sincere, or was there something else lurking beneath his cool exterior? "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're—" "Do you believe in fate, Isabella?" he interrupted her, his gaze intense. She wasn't sure how to respond. Fate? What did he mean by that? She began but stopped herself, not knowing where this conversation was headed. "I don't think it matters." He gave her a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "It matters more than you think." Before she could say anything else, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving her standing there, confused and unsure of what had just happened. Later that night, as Isabella tried to sleep, her mind was plagued by thoughts of Dominic Vercetti. There was something about him, something magnetic, that she couldn't ignore. The way he carried himself, the authority in his voice, and even that fleeting moment when their eyes locked. She was unsettled, but at the same time, there was a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. But what could that reason be? This chapter sets the stage for the unexpected connection between Isabella had tried to shake off the strange encounter with Dominic Vercetti, but no matter how hard she tried, it lingered. She couldn't forget the intensity in his eyes, the way he had spoken to her as if he knew something she didn't. It was as if the brief moments they shared had altered something deep within her, a feeling she couldn't explain. For the next few days, she focused on her work, staying in her own world as much as possible. The restaurant had its rhythm, and she had learned how to navigate through the faces of the wealthy and powerful without feeling too out of place. But whenever she caught sight of Dominic's name in the news or overheard whispered conversations in the kitchen about him, she couldn't help but think about their brief interaction. She had never believed in fate, or in the idea that people crossed paths for a reason. But now, with the memory of his penetrating gaze and strange words, she wasn't so sure. Then, 3 weeks after that fateful encounter, her life took a turn she never expected. She was in the middle of her shift when she saw him again. This time, there were no casual glances, no fleeting moments. Dominic Vercetti stood at the entrance of the restaurant, his sharp suit making him stand out among the other patrons. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as her eyes locked with his. There was something different about him today. He wasn't surrounded by his usual entourage, and there was no smirk on his lips, just an unreadable look. Without wasting any time, he moved toward her. "Isabella," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "I need to speak with you." Her stomach flipped. There was no mistaking the seriousness in his tone. He wasn't asking, he was telling her. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Of course." He led her to a quiet corner of the restaurant, away from the other diners, before turning to face her. His gaze was intense, but there was a softness in his expression that wasn't there the last time they spoke. He looked tired. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. Isabella hesitated for a moment, but then complied. Her hands fidgeted nervously in her lap as she glanced up at him, unsure of what was coming next. "You've been on my mind for a while now," Dominic said, his voice surprisingly low. "Ever since our last conversation, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't possibly mean that, could he? She started, but he cut her off. It happened that night between them. "I don't usually do this. I don't open up to people. But I can't get you out of my head, and I need to make sure you understand what's at stake here." Isabella frowned. "What's at stake?" "I don't understand." He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on her. "You don't know this, but I'm not just a businessman. I'm part of a world, a dangerous world. A world that I control, but that also controls me. I've made enemies, and those enemies won't stop until they destroy everything I've built." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She knew Dominic was wealthy, but hearing him speak so openly about his life made everything feel far more real, far more dangerous. "What does this have to do with me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic paused, as if he were weighing his next words carefully. "I'm asking you to marry me." Isabella blinked, not quite comprehending what he had just said. "Marry you?" she repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "Why would I marry you? We barely know each other." He gave her a hard look, almost as though he were daring her to argue. "Because I need protection. Protection for you. Protection for the children." Isabella froze. "Children? What, children?" she asked, her mind racing. Dominic's eyes softened, though there was still an edge of urgency in his expression. "You're pregnant, Isabella. With my child." Her world spun. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear the fog that had suddenly clouded her mind. "Pregnant," she whispered. "But, that's impossible. We barely—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "But sometimes, life doesn't give us a choice. I've had my people check. You're pregnant with triplets." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of reality. Isabella's mind raced. She had always been careful, she had never planned for this. But here it was, a reality she couldn't escape. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her chest tightening. "I'm asking you to marry me, Isabella," Dominic repeated, his voice firm yet sincere. "Not just for me, but for you and the children. I can't let you raise them alone. There are too many people who want to harm you. I'll protect you. I'll give you a life of safety, of security. But I need you to trust me." Isabella's heart pounded. She was overwhelmed, torn between disbelief and an undeniable, growing sense of responsibility. Her entire world had just been turned upside down. She had never imagined herself marrying someone like Dominic Vercetti, someone so powerful, so dangerous. But now, she was pregnant with his children, and there was no ignoring the situation. "I can't just marry you because you say so," she said, shaking her head. "I have my own life, my own choices to make." Dominic's gaze hardened, his jaw clenched. "I'm not giving you a choice, Isabella. The moment I found out about the pregnancy, I knew you were in danger. You and the children." Her pulse quickened. And she couldn't ignore the raw intensity in his eyes. There was no denying that he was serious, that he would stop at nothing to make this happen. But even then, she had to ask herself, did she trust him? Did she trust anyone? "You're asking me to marry you because I'm carrying your children," she said, her voice trembling. "What if I don't want to? What if I want to raise them on my own?" Dominic's expression softened for a moment, a flicker of something vulnerable behind the coldness. "I can't let you do that, Isabella. It's not safe. Not for you. Not for them. You'll be protected under my name, my family's name. I can offer you everything. Everything." It sounded tempting. But was it enough to give up her own independence? Was it enough to trust him with her future, and the future of their children? "I can't promise you love," he said, his voice softer now. "But I can promise you security. And I can promise you that I'll protect you." The silence between them was thick with the weight of his words. Isabella stared at him, unsure of what to say. Everything in her screamed to run, to walk away from this dangerous man who was offering her everything in exchange for something she wasn't sure she could give. But at the same time, she was pregnant with his children. She had to think about their future, and whether or not she could trust him. "I'll think about it," she said quietly, her voice wavering. "But this isn't something I can decide in a moment." Dominic nodded slowly, his eyes searching hers, but there was no question in his mind. He was giving her an offer she couldn't refuse. Isabella's mind raced as she left the restaurant that night. Dominic's words echoed in her head, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the weight of what he had said. Triplets. Married to him. A life she had never imagined for herself was suddenly on the horizon, whether she was ready or not. She barely slept that night, tossing and turning, trying to come to terms with everything. The idea of marrying Dominic felt suffocating. He was a man she barely knew, and the world he was a part of, the mafia, the danger, the power, was one she wanted no part in. But the thought of raising 3 children on her own, especially in a city like this, was equally terrifying. What would she do? Could she really walk away from this offer? Could she risk everything, including the safety of her children, just to maintain her independence? The next morning, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she knew it was him before she even answered. "Isabella," Dominic's voice came through the line, smooth and calm as ever. "Have you thought about what I said? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I've thought about it a lot," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm not sure I can make that decision yet. There's a lot to consider." "You don't have much time," he said. His voice, while still calm, carried an edge. "I can protect you. I can give you a life that's safe, secure. You won't have to worry about the things you're worried about now. You'll never have to look over your shoulder." Isabella felt the pressure in his words, and despite herself, a small part of her wanted to believe him. "I can't just marry you, Dominic," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I need more than promises." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then he responded, quieter this time. "I know, Isabella. I know. But I can give you everything you need. And I'll give you the space you want. This doesn't have to be something you hate." She could hear the sincerity in his voice, but it didn't erase the doubts in her mind. Could she really trust him? Could she trust a man like him with her life, with the lives of her children? "I need some time," she said, her voice firm. "I need to think this through." "You have until tomorrow," he replied. "The longer you wait, the more dangerous it becomes." Isabella's heart sank. There it was again, the threat. She knew what kind of world she was stepping into, but she hadn't expected it to come with such a hard deadline. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "I'll decide by tomorrow." The next evening, Isabella stood at the window of her apartment, gazing out over the city. The lights were flickering below, and the bustling streets seemed so far away from her quiet, isolated world. She felt the weight of her decision settling in her chest. What kind of life could she give her children if she rejected Dominic's offer? Was she prepared to live in constant fear, always wondering if someone would come after her or them? A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a man in a sharp suit, holding a large envelope. He didn't say anything, just handed it to her and left as quickly as he came. She looked down at the envelope, its sleek surface almost mocking her. With a deep breath, she opened it. Inside was a document. Her heart skipped when she saw the words, "Marriage Contract," printed at the top. There was no turning back now. She skimmed through the document. It was clear, direct. Dominic's proposal was no longer just a suggestion. This was a formal agreement, one that tied her to him, to his family, and to a life she wasn't sure she could handle. The terms were laid out plainly: they would marry within the week, and in exchange, he would provide for her and their children. He would ensure their safety, give them a life of luxury and security. He would be their protector, and she would be his wife. There was no room for negotiation. Isabella let the paper slip from her hands, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to push so hard, to make everything feel so final. She sat down on the couch, clutching her stomach. The triplets inside her felt like a constant reminder of how much her life had changed in such a short time. Was this really the best decision for them? Could she bring herself to trust him? The thought of living in fear, constantly on the run, made her stomach churn. She had to face the reality: she couldn't protect her children on her own. She couldn't keep them safe in this world without some form of protection. And in the dangerous world Dominic inhabited, his offer was the only chance she had at keeping them safe. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Dominic. "I know this is hard. But I'm not giving up. I'm doing this for you, for them. I'll be there at 7 p.m. tomorrow to pick you up. It's time." She stared at the message for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The clock was ticking. She had made up her mind. She had to do this. For her children. For their future. The next evening, Isabella stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She hadn't imagined this day coming, not like this. She wasn't sure what kind of woman she had become in such a short time. She was going to marry a man who lived in a world she didn't understand, a world of power, fear, and danger. But the triplets needed her, and she had to do what she could to give them a chance. At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Her heart skipped. It was time. She opened the door to find Dominic standing there, dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. His eyes softened when he saw her, though there was a tightness to his jaw. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Isabella took a deep breath, her heart racing. She didn't feel ready, but this was the moment. There was no turning back. "I'm ready," she whispered. He nodded, taking her hand gently. "Then let's go." As they walked out the door, Isabella felt the weight of the decision she had made. She was stepping into a world she didn't know, a world of power and danger. But she was also stepping into a future she could no longer face alone. The contract was signed. The marriage was happening. And her life with Dominic Vercetti was just beginning. The wedding was quick, too quick. One moment, Isabella was signing papers, her hand trembling as she signed her name on the dotted line. The next, she was standing in front of Dominic in a small, private ceremony, his cold gaze never leaving her face as they exchanged vows. It felt surreal, almost like she was watching someone else's life unfold in front of her. She barely had time to process the enormity of the situation before it was over. Now, as the car sped through the city streets to what would become their home, Isabella couldn't help but feel the weight of the choice she had made. This wasn't just a marriage. It was a partnership, a contract forged by necessity, with stakes higher than anything she had ever imagined. She wasn't just marrying a man, she was becoming part of a world that terrified her. The luxury of the car, the sleek, dark windows, and the silent driver were reminders that her life was no longer her own. It was as if the man beside her, Dominic, had stepped into her world without asking, and now she had no choice but to follow along. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. He was staring out the window, his jaw tight, his mind somewhere else. The coldness in his demeanor was still there, but there was something else now, a flicker of vulnerability that she hadn't noticed before. She had no idea who Dominic Vercetti really was. Not really. She knew the rumors, of course. Everyone knew the rumors. That he was ruthless. That he was dangerous. That he'd built his empire on fear and manipulation. But what had led him down that path? What had turned him into the man who sat next to her now, a man who had all the wealth and power he could ever want, and yet, it wasn't enough. The car pulled up to a tall, imposing building, his home, she assumed. The place was grand, even more so than the restaurant. The marble floors, the polished wood, the towering walls, all of it screamed wealth and power. Yet, it felt strangely empty. Isabella stepped out of the car, feeling small in the shadow of this place. Dominic was already at the door, unlocking it with a flick of his wrist, and she followed him inside. "Welcome home," he said, his voice devoid of warmth, but somehow still carrying an undercurrent of something more. It wasn't affection, but it wasn't complete indifference either. It was like he was acknowledging her presence but not quite ready to make her a part of his world. She didn't respond. There was no need for words yet. She didn't know where to begin. As they moved further into the house, Isabella felt the weight of the silence. Every step they took seemed to echo through the grand hallway. There were no personal touches, no photographs, nothing to give her a sense of the man behind the empire. This house was a fortress, not a home. Dominic led her into a spacious living room, the large windows offering a view of the city skyline. It was beautiful, but again, it felt sterile. Like everything else in his life. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, his voice low. "But you'll get used to it." Isabella didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if she wanted to get used to it. She hadn't expected luxury, but this? This was suffocating. "I'm not here to make things difficult for you, Isabella," Dominic continued, his tone steady but with a hint of something she couldn't place. "You don't have to worry about anything. You and the children will be safe here." I'll provide everything you need. She glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. I never asked for any of this, Dominic. This isn't the life I wanted. But now I'm trapped in it. He met her gaze, the faintest trace of regret flickering across his face. You're not trapped. You have more freedom than you think. Isabella shook her head. Freedom? How? By marrying you? You think that's freedom? Dominic's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. He stood there, as if weighing his next words carefully, before finally speaking. I'm trying to protect you. You don't understand the dangers that come with the life I lead. You think it's all power and wealth, but it's not. It's a constant battle. Every decision, every move, every relationship I have is shaped by that. Isabella was silent, her eyes searching his face for some sign of honesty, some crack in the impenetrable armor he had built around himself. I don't trust easily, he added, his voice quieter now. Not even the people closest to me. But I trust you, more than you realize. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. But what did they mean? What was he really asking of her? Could she really trust him? I don't want to be a pawn in your world, Dominic, she said, her voice breaking through the silence. I'm not here to be your decoration, your wife in name only. I want to understand. I want to know who you really are, not just the image you've created for everyone else. He stared at her for a long moment, and for the first time since their marriage, something in his eyes shifted. It was almost as if he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. I'll show you, he said quietly. But not yet. There are things I can't explain, not until I know you'll be safe. Until I know you'll stay. Stay. The word hung in the air, and Isabella felt a pang of uncertainty. Could she stay? Could she trust him? That night, as she lay in the large, impersonal bed Dominic had set aside for her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the edge of something much bigger than herself. Something dangerous. Something that could break her. She had agreed to this marriage out of necessity, out of fear for her children's future, but now that she was living in this world, she couldn't help but wonder just how far Dominic would go to keep her and the triplets safe. And what sacrifices he had made in the past to get to where he was. The answers, she knew, would come, whether she was ready for them or not. Isabella's first few days in Dominic's home were a blur. She wandered through the cavernous halls, settling into a routine she wasn't sure she could get used to. The house was silent, uncomfortably so. It was like living in a fortress where every corner seemed to whisper of danger, of secrets, of lives lived in the shadows. Dominic kept to himself, his presence distant yet ever looming. He never forced conversation, never pushed her for anything beyond what was necessary. His focus, it seemed, was on the business, the empire he was constantly building and protecting. And Isabella? She was a part of that empire now, but she felt like an outsider looking in. The children, her triplets, became her anchor. Their tiny kicks and movements reminded her that, no matter how strange this world became, she had something to hold on to. She hadn't told Dominic much about how she was feeling, but it was clear that his attention was mostly on the business. He'd check in with her occasionally, but only out of duty. He made it clear from the beginning that their relationship would be business first, personal second. But there were moments, small moments, that shifted something inside her. One evening, as she wandered through the living room, staring out the window at the city skyline, Dominic walked in. He wasn't in his usual suit but in a casual black shirt and dark jeans, a rare sight for Isabella. He didn't look like the ruthless mafia boss in this moment. He looked, almost human. You don't have to stay locked away in this house, you know, he said, his voice almost too soft for someone of his stature. If you want to go out, I can arrange it. Isabella turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. There was no mistaking the underlying tension in his words. He wasn't offering her freedom out of kindness. It was more like he was trying to give her an illusion of control in a situation where she had none. "I don't want to go out," she said quietly. "I don't even know where to go." Dominic nodded, his eyes darkening. "You don't have to be confined here. I can't keep you locked up forever, Isabella. You'll want more soon enough." His words carried an unspoken promise that made her heart skip. He was giving her space, but she knew the price. Her freedom was an illusion. She was bound to him, by law, by the children she carried, by the choice she had made. But she couldn't help the small flicker of hope his words ignited. Maybe this wasn't the life she'd envisioned, but maybe, just maybe, there could be something more. Days turned into weeks, and things slowly began to shift. Dominic was there, always there, watching her, but in a way that wasn't oppressive. It was as though he was waiting for her to come to him, to trust him enough to ask for something more. And yet, she couldn't make herself reach out. She couldn't bring herself to ask questions that had no answers. The secrets that hung between them were thick and undeniable, like the air before a storm. She knew he had his reasons for keeping her at arm's length, but it didn't stop her from feeling isolated in this lavish prison. Then came the night that everything changed. Isabella was in the garden, the cold evening air crisp against her skin. She wandered through the meticulously kept flowers and hedges, trying to clear her mind, but it wasn't enough. Her thoughts kept circling back to Dominic, to the strange pull she felt toward him. There was something beneath his cold exterior, something hidden. And as much as she tried to fight it, she couldn't help but wonder what lay beneath the surface. She turned a corner, and there he was. Dominic was standing in the shadow of the garden, his back to her, looking up at the sky. She hadn't expected to see him here, and his presence took her by surprise. "You're still awake?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "Couldn't sleep." Isabella didn't say anything for a moment, watching him closely. There was something about him tonight. Something different. "You're not the man I thought you were," she said quietly, her voice almost unrecognizable in its vulnerability. Dominic raised an eyebrow, stepping closer to her. "And what exactly did you think I was?" "I thought you were, just like the rumors say," she replied, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "Cold. Untouchable. A man who only cares about power." Dominic's lips twitched into something like a smile, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what to think," she admitted, taking a step closer. "I'm still trying to figure you out." For a long moment, they just stood there, the space between them charged with something neither of them could name. The night was quiet, the world seeming to fall away as they shared this unspoken connection. It wasn't love. It wasn't trust. But it was something real, something raw. And for a brief second, Isabella could almost feel like she wasn't just another piece of Dominic's empire. "You think you know me," Dominic said softly. "But you don't. No one does." Isabella felt the weight of his words, a heavy truth that settled deep inside her. He had been right all along. She didn't know him. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't want her to. "You've built this wall around yourself," she said quietly, staring at the ground. "And I'm just stuck on the other side." He exhaled sharply, as though frustrated with himself. "I don't let people in easily, Isabella. I can't afford to." She looked up at him, meeting his gaze. For the first time, she saw something other than the cold, calculating man everyone feared. There was fear there, real, human fear, and it terrified her. "What do you fear?" she asked, her voice softer now. Dominic hesitated, his jaw tightening. He didn't answer immediately, but she saw it in his eyes. The hesitation, the darkness he kept buried beneath layers of control. "I fear losing control," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "I fear losing everything I've worked for." Isabella understood. It wasn't just power he craved, it was the need to protect what he had built, what he had created, what he thought he could keep safe. And her? She was a part of that now, whether she wanted to be or not. "But you're not alone anymore," she whispered. "You don't have to keep it all locked away." Dominic's eyes softened ever so slightly, but there was still a distance between them, a chasm that neither of them could cross, not yet. "I'm not used to letting people in," he said, his voice almost a murmur. "But I can try." Isabella didn't know what that meant. She didn't know if she could trust him. But in that moment, she realized that they were both trapped in their own prisons, him by the empire he had created, and her by the marriage that had bound them together. And yet, despite the walls between them, something was slowly starting to change. Maybe it wasn't love, but it was a beginning. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the shadows they both lived in. The days in Dominic's world blurred together like pages in a book she couldn't fully read. Isabella had settled into her life in the mansion, though she often felt like a guest rather than a wife. Every morning, she took long walks through the gardens, watched the city skyline, and cared for the triplets. At night, the loneliness crept in as she lay awake in the large bed, wondering if she was ever going to truly understand the man she had married. Despite their occasional moments of connection, Dominic was as distant as ever. His presence, though constant, was like a shadow in the house. He had begun to give her more freedom. She was allowed to leave the house if she wanted, go out for walks, even run errands. But there was an unmistakable undercurrent to everything. It was the ever-present knowledge that she was not truly free. His world was still holding her in place. And it was a dangerous world. Isabella could feel it in her bones, could hear the hushed conversations between Dominic's men in the halls, the way they would stop talking when she walked into the room. She had caught glimpses of the people Dominic surrounded himself with, hard, calculating men who operated in a world that was beyond her comprehension. It wasn't until one late afternoon that the dangers of that world came crashing into her life. Isabella had just returned from a walk through the nearby park when she noticed the change in the air. The guards stationed at the entrance were no longer relaxed. They were tense, their eyes scanning every corner, their hands resting on the weapons they always carried. She could feel it, something was wrong. As she stepped into the house, she saw Dominic talking in hushed tones with one of his men, his face grim. The conversation paused the moment he saw her. His eyes hardened, and he gave a quick nod to the man before walking toward her. "What's going on?" Isabella asked, her voice steady but tinged with worry. Dominic didn't answer immediately. Instead, he led her to the side of the house, away from the prying ears of his men. The weight of his silence pressed against her chest. "There are threats," he said, his voice low. "I'm not sure who, but someone has gotten too close. My enemies are making their move." Isabella's stomach churned. "You mean, the people you've been dealing with?" "Yes," he replied, his eyes darkening. "The ones who don't want me to succeed. The ones who want to take it all away." She swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. She had known that Dominic's world was dangerous, but hearing him admit it, hearing the fear in his voice, it hit her harder than she expected. "Are we safe?" she asked quietly. Dominic met her gaze, his face hard, but something flickered in his eyes, something vulnerable. "I'm doing everything I can to keep you safe," he said. "But we can't ignore the fact that we're targets. The closer you get to me, the more danger you're in." The word stung, but Isabella couldn't ignore. "Everything I can to keep you safe," he said. "But we can't ignore the fact that we're targets. The closer you get to me, the more danger you're in." The word stung, but Isabella couldn't ignore the truth. She was already in this world, tied to it by more than just her marriage. She was carrying his children. There was no way out now. But then, she remembered something. Something Dominic had said to her in the early days of their marriage: "I'll protect you. I'll give you a life of safety, of security." She had to trust him, right? She had no other choice. I won't run, Isabella said, her voice steady. I'm not going anywhere. Dominic's eyes softened for a brief moment, but it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. He reached for her hand, his grip firm. I didn't want this for you. You don't deserve any of this. I'm not afraid of you, she said softly, her eyes locking with his. I'm afraid of losing you, Dominic. Of losing my children. I can't live in fear. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. The gesture surprised her. She had never expected him to be tender, to show this side of himself. Stay close, he whispered into her hair. I'll do everything to make sure nothing happens to you. But there's a war brewing, and it's not just about me anymore. It's about us. Isabella nodded, feeling the gravity of his words. A war. It was more than just business for Dominic. It was survival. Later that evening, Dominic called a meeting with his men. Isabella was told to stay in her room, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gripped her. She knew something was coming. She could feel it. As she paced the room, she overheard snippets of conversation from the hallway. Low voices, quick steps. Something was happening. It wasn't just about business anymore, this was personal. And for the first time since marrying Dominic, Isabella understood what he had meant when he said he feared losing everything. She pressed her ear against the door, trying to catch more of the conversation. She heard Dominic's voice, clear and firm, we have to act fast. If we don't, we risk losing everything. She didn't know what to make of it, but the fear in his voice was enough to make her heart race. Hours later, Dominic returned, his face tight, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He didn't look at her immediately, walking past her without a word. Isabella followed him to the study, where he stopped to look out the window, his back to her. Who is it? She asked softly. Who's behind this? Dominic didn't turn around, but she could hear the edge in his voice as he spoke. It doesn't matter who it is. What matters is that they won't stop. I won't let them take what's mine. Take you mean? Isabella asked, her voice quiet but piercing. Take us. Dominic was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. Yes. But I won't let. Yes. But I won't let that happen. I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes to protect you and the children. She didn't respond, her eyes focused on his back. There was nothing more to say. The danger was real. And it was closing in on them. That night, as she lay in bed, her mind raced with thoughts of the future. Dominic had promised her safety, promised her protection. But could she truly trust him? Could she trust the man who lived in a world of shadows and secrets? The danger was real. But so was the connection she felt with him, even if it was fragile and uncertain. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring more challenges. But tonight, all she could do was wait, and hope that, despite the dark world they lived in, they could find a way to survive. The tension in the house had thickened, like the air before a storm. Dominic had never been more distant, though his actions, his subtle glances, his constant vigilance, made it clear that the danger was far from over. His men came and went at all hours, whispers of plans and threats filling the corridors. Isabella, trapped in her own thoughts and the confines of the mansion, felt a gnawing anxiety grow inside her. The weeks following Dominic's revelation had been marked by more security, more precautions. His every move seemed calculated, and he kept to himself more and more, focusing on the empire he was trying to protect. Isabella couldn't blame him for it, but the growing distance between them was becoming unbearable. One evening, as the sun began to set and the house grew quieter, Isabella found herself standing by the window again, her mind spinning with the uncertainty of it all. She had promised herself that she would stand by Dominic, no matter the cost. But with each passing day, her trust in him, her trust in this world, was beginning to crack. There was a soft knock on her door, and her heart skipped. She wasn't expecting anyone, but the moment the door opened and Dominic stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. His presence filled the room, commanding and tense, like a storm ready to break. "Isabella," he said, his voice low but firm. "We need to talk." She didn't respond immediately, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of his face. She could see the exhaustion in him, the weight of everything pressing down on his shoulders. But she could also see the hardness in his eyes, the wall he had built between them. The man she had married, this man who promised to protect her and their children, was disappearing before her eyes, and she didn't know how to stop it. "About what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She already knew the answer. "The threats aren't over," he said, his tone dark. "The people after me, after us. They're closing in. I can't keep you safe in this house forever." Isabella swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She had known this was coming, but hearing it from Dominic, the man who had vowed to protect her, sent a chill through her. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice faltering. "Where will we go?" He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm taking you somewhere safer. Somewhere no one can reach us." Isabella's stomach twisted in knots. Safe? How could she ever feel safe in this world? She was already a part of it, tangled in the web of power and danger that Dominic had created. But what choice did she have? "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't just take me away from everything. You can't take me away from the life I'm trying to build for the children." "I'm not giving you a choice," he said, his words cold but filled with an underlying frustration. "This isn't about what you want, Isabella. This is about keeping you alive. Keeping the children alive. This isn't about what you want, Isabella. This is about keeping you alive. Keeping the children alive." His words cut through her, the sharpness in his tone like a slap to the face. She stepped back, feeling the emotional distance between them widen. It wasn't just the physical danger that threatened them. It was the emotional wreckage that was slowly tearing them apart. "Is that what this is?" she asked, her voice rising. "Keeping us alive? Is that all you care about? I thought there was more to us than just surviving, Dominic. I thought we could build something." Dominic's face darkened, his jaw tightening in frustration. "You don't get it, do you?" he snapped. "I've spent my entire life building an empire, making sure nothing and no one can touch me. I'm trying to protect you from the consequences of that life." Isabella felt a wave of emotion rise within her. "And what about me?" she cried, her voice cracking. "What about what I need? What about the life I wanted before this mess? You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to be caught in this world, in this dangerous game?" Dominic's expression softened, but only for a second. He stepped toward her, his hand reaching for her arm, but she pulled away, her heart racing. "You think I don't know how hard this is?" he asked, his voice quiet now. "You think I don't see how much it's breaking you? You think I'm doing this because I want to hurt you?" "I don't know what you want anymore," Isabella whispered, her throat tight with emotion. "I don't know who you are." Dominic's eyes darkened, the weight of her words settling on him. For a moment, the hardness in his expression faltered. It was as if she had hit a nerve, something deep within him that he had buried long ago. "I never wanted this life for you," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "I never wanted to drag you into this mess. But I made a choice when I brought you into my world. And I can't undo it." Isabella's chest tightened as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. "But you can't keep me in a cage, Dominic. You can't just control everything. I'm not a piece of property. I'm a person." He reached out again, but this time, she didn't pull away. His touch was gentle, almost tentative, like he wasn't sure if he had the right to touch her at all. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice strained. "I never meant for it to be like this." The softness in his voice made something inside Isabella break. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to scream at him, to demand that he understand how much pain he had caused her, how much she had sacrificed for this life. But all she could do was stand there, her heart aching as she realized how much they had both lost in the wake of their choices. "I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Dominic's hand cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. His touch was tender. Almost painfully so, as if he were afraid to break her completely. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here. I'll always be here. No matter what happens." For a long moment, they stood there, the weight of their shared pain hanging between them like an invisible wall. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't even an answer. But in that brief silence, there was something unspoken between them, a fragile understanding, a glimpse of something they both needed. Isabella closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. She wasn't sure where they were headed, but in that moment, she understood one thing: they were both just trying to survive. And in this dangerous world, survival was all they could cling to. The days following their emotional confrontation had left Isabella feeling more confused than ever. The silence between her and Dominic had grown thicker, not with anger, but with an unspoken understanding of their fragile bond. The tension was palpable, hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. She tried to focus on the growing life inside her, her triplets. It was the only thing that could anchor her amidst the chaos, the only thing that felt real and untouched by the danger and darkness that surrounded them. But no matter how hard she tried to push everything else out of her mind, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just the threats. It wasn't just the looming danger that Dominic had warned her about. There was something else. She could feel it in the house, in the way the men who worked for Dominic looked at her with barely concealed suspicion, in the way Dominic had become more withdrawn, more distant, as if carrying a secret too heavy to share. It was late one evening, when the mansion was wrapped in the familiar silence, that everything changed. Isabella had been sitting in the garden, her mind heavy with unanswered questions. She had just finished her usual walk when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, expecting to see one of the guards, but instead, a familiar figure stepped into view, one of Dominic's most trusted men, Leo. Leo had been with Dominic for years. He was sharp, loyal, and ruthless, a man who never spoke out of turn, who followed orders without question. But tonight, something was off. His usually calm and collected demeanor was replaced by an unmistakable tension in his posture, and his eyes darted around nervously before they landed on her. "Isabella," Leo said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dominic wants to see you." Something in the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. Leo had never spoken to her in such a guarded, uneasy tone before. She nodded, standing up slowly, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answers to. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" Leo hesitated, his eyes flicking to the door of the mansion, then back to her. "Just come with me." Isabella didn't have time to ask further questions. She followed Leo through the house, her footsteps heavy against the cold marble floors. They moved through the long, empty hallways, past the rooms she had come to call home, until they reached Dominic's private study. Leo knocked lightly on the door before opening it. Inside, Dominic stood at his desk, his back to the door, staring out the window. He looked lost in thought, his usual sharp, calculated expression absent. He hadn't noticed her enter until Leo stepped aside, giving her a clear view of him. Dominic turned, his face hard as stone. But there was something different in his eyes, a shadow of something that made her stomach tighten with unease. "I need you to sit down, Isabella," Dominic said. His voice cold, almost detached. Isabella's heart raced. The chill in his tone sent a ripple of fear through her, but she obeyed, sitting in the chair across from his desk. She tried to keep her composure, her eyes never leaving his, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Dominic," she said softly. "What's happening? You've been distant. I don't understand." He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then, without warning, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a file. He slid it across the desk toward her, his expression unchanged. Isabella opened it slowly, her hands trembling as she looked at the contents. The first page was filled with images of Dominic, standing alongside Leo, meeting with men she didn't recognize. Then there were documents, contracts, handwritten notes, all with names she didn't understand. Her eyes scanned the pages in a blur, until one name caught her attention. It was a name she had never heard before, but something about it stirred a memory deep within her. "Who is this?" she asked, pointing to the name. "What does this have to do with me?" Dominic's jaw clenched. "That man, he's the one who's been feeding information to my enemies. He's the one who's been selling out everything I've worked for." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. "Leo?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's face hardened. "Yes. Leo. He's been working against me for months. I didn't want to believe it, but I've had my people investigate. He's the traitor." Isabella's heart sank. Leo? The man who had always been by Dominic's side, the one who had always treated her with a certain respect, despite the dangerous world he was a part of. How could it be him? "You're sure?" she asked, her voice shaking. "There's no mistake." Dominic nodded, his eyes dark. "There's no mistake. I've trusted him like a brother, and he's betrayed me. And now, he's put you and the children in danger." Isabella stood abruptly, her mind spinning. The room felt too small, the walls closing in around her. "How could he do this?" she whispered. "Why would he do this?" Dominic stood, crossing the room toward her. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm, but not rough. "Because he's been bought," he said. "By someone who wants me out of the picture, who wants to take everything I've worked for. He's been feeding them information about you, about the children. Everything." Isabella's stomach churned. The betrayal stung like nothing she had ever felt before. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's face darkened, his expression cold and resolute. "I'm going to make sure he pays for what he's done. No one betrays me. No one betrays us." Isabella felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Dominic was a man who lived in a world of vengeance, and she had known that when she married him. But hearing him speak with such finality, knowing that someone close to them had orchestrated this betrayal, made her feel as if the ground beneath her was shifting, unsteady. "Dominic," she said quietly, her voice trembling, "I'm scared. I don't know what's happening anymore." Dominic's gaze softened slightly, and he stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I'll keep you safe, Isabella. I promised you that, and I'll make sure it's true." But even as he said the words, Isabella felt the weight of his promise hang heavy in the air. How could she trust him when the very people closest to them were plotting behind their backs? As she stood there, in the heart of his empire, Isabella realized that she was trapped. In a world of danger, deception, and betrayal, there was no escape. And the man she had married, who she had thought could protect her, was just as vulnerable to the shadows as she was. The house was quiet, too quiet. The betrayal had sent a shockwave through Dominic's world, and it was now spreading to her own. The walls seemed to close in around Isabella as she tried to piece together the fragments of what was happening. Leo's betrayal weighed heavily on her, and even though Dominic had promised to keep her safe, the lingering doubt gnawed at her. She had never imagined that she would be caught up in such a tangled web of power, loyalty, and violence. Dominic had always been a man of strength and control, but now, she saw a crack in that armor. She had never wanted to be a part of his world, the world he had dragged her into through marriage, but now it was impossible to ignore. She was in deeper than she had ever thought possible. Isabella lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The night felt endless. The air was thick with uncertainty. The once calming quiet of the mansion now seemed oppressive. Dominic hadn't come to her room that night. He hadn't even checked in. She had heard him talking to his men in hushed tones earlier, his voice cold and tense. She knew things were escalating, but it still didn't prepare her for the next shock. At dawn, she was woken by a loud bang. The sound was sharp, unsettling, and it tore through the peaceful silence of the mansion. Isabella shot up in bed, her heart racing. Another explosion of noise echoed through the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots stomping through the hall. Isabella was out of bed in an instant, her pulse thundering in her ears. She threw on a robe and rushed out into the hallway. The house felt like it was shaking with each step, each noise amplifying the feeling of impending danger. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew it wasn't good. She ran toward the source of the noise, Dominic's study. As she approached, the door flew open, and she came face to face with Dominic, his face flushed with anger, his eyes sharp with a deadly intensity. Behind him, several of his men were on the phone, pacing nervously. "Isabella," Dominic said, his voice rough. "Stay in your room. Now." Isabella didn't flinch at his command. She had heard him bark orders before, but there was something different in his tone today. The world he had tried to shield her from had finally broken through, and there was no escaping it now. She wasn't going to hide away in her room. Not anymore. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady, though she could feel the tremble in her hands. "What's happening?" Dominic shot her a hard look, his jaw clenched. "You don't need to know. It's not safe here anymore." He didn't give her a chance to ask any more questions. Instead, he grabbed her arm, his grip tight, and began pulling her toward the stairs. "Dominic, let me go." Isabella snapped, pulling her arm from his grasp. "I'm not some pawn in your game. I'm not going to just sit back and—" "This is not the time for arguments, Isabella." He interrupted, his voice rising with frustration. His eyes were wild, his breath shallow. "You want to be part of this life? Then you need to understand. I can't keep you safe if you're in the way. You need to trust me, for once." For a split second, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't anger or control. It was fear. Fear for her, for their children, for everything he had worked so hard to protect. But then the mask of coldness slid back into place, and he pulled her down the hallway, his steps forceful. Isabella could feel the weight of his fear hanging between them, but she didn't know how to respond. She was terrified too, terrified of losing him, of being trapped in a life that she didn't understand, a life that had already cost her so much. They reached the back entrance of the mansion, where a sleek black car was waiting. Dominic shoved the door open, his movements fast, efficient. He practically pushed Isabella into the back seat before sliding in beside her. The driver, a stoic man in his 30s, didn't say a word as he started the car and pulled away from the mansion. As they drove away from the house, the tension in the car was palpable. Isabella sat quietly, her mind spinning, unsure of what to say. They hadn't said a word since leaving the mansion. The streets were dark and empty, the city still asleep, but everything felt different now. The air itself seemed heavy with impending doom. She needed answers. She needed to know what had happened, what had gone so wrong. "Dominic," she started, her voice quieter than she intended. "What's really going on? Who betrayed you? Why didn't you tell me?" Dominic's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer immediately. The silence between them was suffocating. "Do you really want to know?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Isabella met his gaze, her breath shallow. "Yes. I do." Dominic exhaled slowly, his hand tightening on the seat. "It's Leo. He's been working against me for months. And now, it's worse than I thought. He's been selling out my every move to my enemies. And they're closing in, Isabella. They're close, and I can't protect you from it anymore. Isabella felt the weight of his words settle over her. The man she had trusted, the man who had seemed invincible, was broken. She had seen the cracks in his armor before, but now, they were wide open. He wasn't the ruthless mafia boss anymore. He was just a man, trying to hold on to the only thing he still cared about, her, their children, and everything he had built. I thought you were different, Isabella said, her voice trembling. I thought we could build something together. But all I've seen is you pushing me away. You've been so focused on protecting me that you forgot to let me in. Dominic's eyes softened, but only slightly. I never wanted you to be a part of this world, Isabella. I never wanted you to see any of this. But it's too late. You're in this with me, whether you like it or not. The car sped through the. Dominic's eyes softened, but only slightly. I never wanted you to be a part of this world, Isabella. I never wanted you to see any of this. But it's too late. You're in this with me, whether you like it or not. The car sped through the empty streets, but Isabella didn't feel like she was moving anymore. She felt like she was floating in an abyss, torn between her growing feelings for Dominic and the painful reality that she didn't know if she could trust him. The betrayal of Leo still lingered in her mind, the sharp edge of it cutting deeper with every passing second. How could she ever trust anyone in this world again? How could she trust Dominic when he was so willing to shut her out for her own protection? When they reached the safe house, Dominic turned to her, his face hard once more. Stay here. I'll take care of the rest. Isabella didn't argue. She was tired of running, tired of being pushed away, tired of the constant fear that dominated their lives. But as she watched him leave, she realized that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about the truth of who they were, who they had become, and whether or not their fragile connection could survive the storm that was about to tear them apart. The safe house was smaller than the mansion, more secure and hidden from the public eye, but it felt like a prison to Isabella. The walls were bare, the room sparse, and despite the safety it offered, the suffocating silence was too much to bear. She had been here for days now, watching the same four walls, waiting for Dominic to return. He had gone to handle the fallout from Leo's betrayal, and while she understood the necessity of it, she couldn't help the dread that gnawed at her. The silence was broken only by the occasional knock at the door, the few meals brought to her by a stoic man who barely looked at her. She couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. As much as Dominic had promised to protect her, as much as he had claimed to keep her safe, she felt more alone than ever. Her mind kept returning to the events of the last few weeks, the violence, the betrayals, and the constant, unrelenting fear. She had thought she could find a way to belong in Dominic's world, that perhaps there was a place for her within it. But every time she tried to reach for him, every time she let her guard down, she was reminded that this was not a world built for trust or love, it was a world built on survival. And survival came at a price. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard the sound of the door opening. Dominic stepped inside, his face grim, his eyes shadowed by the weight of what had just transpired. His clothes were disheveled, his hair unkempt as though he hadn't bothered to care for himself in days. Isabella felt her chest tighten at the sight of him. There was something broken in him, something he had kept hidden for so long, and she wasn't sure she could help him heal it. He shut the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment, his hand gripping the handle as if he was trying to steady himself. The weight of everything seemed to be pressing down on him, suffocating him just like it had suffocated her. He finally pushed away from the door and looked at her. Isabella, he said, his voice rough, worn out by the strain of everything that had happened. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to fix us. Isabella sat on the edge of the couch, her hands in her lap, her heart aching at the vulnerability she saw in him. It wasn't the cold, ruthless man she had married. It wasn't the mafia boss who controlled everything around him. It was just a man, standing before her, struggling to hold on to something that felt real. "You don't have to fix anything," she replied softly, her voice trembling with the emotions she had been holding back. "I don't expect you to. But you've spent so much time trying to protect me from this world, from everything around us, that you forgot to protect us, from yourself. From your own walls." Dominic's face hardened, and for a moment, she feared he would shut her out again. But instead, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His eyes locked onto hers, and there was a rawness in them, a pain that matched her own. "I didn't want you to be part of this," he said, his voice low. "I didn't want you to see the parts of me that are broken, that are beyond redemption. But here we are, Isabella. And I don't know how to make it right." Isabella stood, her feet moving before her mind could catch up, until she was standing before him. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her touch. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered. "You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to let me in." For the first time in what felt like forever, Dominic's eyes softened. The hardness that had once defined him, his walls, his empire, was slowly crumbling, piece by piece. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if the weight of everything he had carried for so long was finally catching up to him. Then, with a deep sigh, he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. His embrace was strong, but it wasn't the controlling hold he had used before. It was desperate, fragile, a man who had finally realized that he couldn't survive alone. "I've been so focused on control, on protecting everyone else, that I forgot to protect what really matters," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Isabella leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat, allowing herself to feel something other than fear. Something other than the weight of the life they had built. She wasn't sure what came next, but in that moment, she knew one thing: they had a chance. A chance to rebuild, to repair the fractures in their relationship and in themselves. "I don't need you to be perfect, Dominic," she said softly, lifting her head to meet his gaze. "I just need you to be here. With me. With the children. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward." Dominic's eyes searched hers for a long moment, as though trying to read her, to understand if she meant what she said. Then, finally, he nodded. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent so much of my life running from everything, my past, my fears, my mistakes. But I'm not running anymore. I'm here. And I'm staying." He pulled her in closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. Like everything outside of this room, outside of their world, didn't matter. It was just the two of them, broken, scarred, but willing to try. Dominic let out a shaky breath, pulling back slightly to look at her. "I'll do whatever it takes, Isabella. I'll fight for us. I'll fight for our family. No more secrets. No more lies." Isabella nodded, a sense of peace slowly settling in her chest. There were no guarantees, no promises that things would be easy. But in that moment, with Dominic by her side, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. They didn't need to fix everything right away. They didn't need to have all the answers. But together, they could rebuild, one step at a time. "I believe in us," she whispered, her hand resting over his heart. "And I believe in you." Dominic held her tightly, his arms surrounding her like a shield. "I'll never let you down again," he whispered, his voice steady now. "You have my word." And in that moment, with the world still dark and uncertain around them, Isabella finally believed him.